I, Afrin Kawas, am the Assistant Director for University Engagements and Partnership at LSAC Global. It is my honor to welcome you all at the inaugural LSAC Global International webinar on the topic, The Changing Landscape of Legal Profession, Law Redefined, organized by LSAC Global under the Discover Law campaign. Last year, we hosted 5 prestigious international webinars on disruptive topics like the intersection of AI and law, contribution of women in law, and future of corporate law, to name a few. This year as well, we would be hosting a series of new discussions every month, focusing on new initiatives and discoveries in the legal profession and education. The webinars will be featuring Indian and international leaders to highlight the academic and professional opportunities for students in the field of law. On behalf of LSAC and LSAC Global Leadership Team, I would like to thank the panelists and our audience for the continued support and dedication towards enhancing access to legal education and increasing diversity in legal profession. On that note, I would like to share the theme of today's webinar. The aim of the webinar is to help law aspirants understand the breadth of disruption and innovation impacting the legal profession. We also aim to provide a glimpse into how law schools are reinventing their curriculum to prepare students for modern practice. Being a lawyer entails broad perspectives, whether local or global. Therefore, the webinar aims to highlight the importance of studying law in the ever-changing legal landscape. Today, on our panel, we have Dean Daniel M. Conway, the Dean and Professor of Law, Dickinson Law, the Pennsylvania State University. Dean Conway is a leading expert in procurement law, entrepreneurship, and intellectual property. She joined Dickinson Law after serving for 4 years as the Dean in the University of Maine School of Law and 14 years on the faculty of the University of Hawaii. Dean Conway is the author and editor of 6 books in case laws, as well as numerous book chapters, articles, and essays. Her scholarly agenda and speeches have focused on, among other things, advocating for public education, for actualizing the right of marginalized groups. Thank you, Dean Conway, for joining for this exciting talk. We look forward to your comments. Next on panel, we have Mr. Akshay Jain. He is the president of 262 Advisor based in Paris. He advises Indian, French, and other international businesses with an interest in Indian policy issues, cross-border strategy, and risk management. He was rated as one of India's top energy and infrastructure lawyers for over a decade. In 2000, he co-founded Trilegal, which has become a leading Indian law firm and was also the head there as the energy and infrastructure practice. Thank you again, sir, for joining for this lovely discussion. We also have on the panel Dr. Preetham Bhura. Dr. Preetham is the professor and dean, School of Law, BML Munjal University. He researches and teaches legal philosophy, constitutional law, and constitutional theory. Previously, Dr. Preetham was Professor of Law and Executive Director for the Center of Public Law and Jurisprudence at O.P. Jindal Global University. He has taught at National University of Jurisdictional Sciences in Kolkata and was also teaching fellow at the University College London. He has also held various visiting professorships at different universities around the world. He has also practiced at the Supreme Court of India. Thank you, sir. We look forward to your discussion today. Last and not the least, we have Mr. Ishaan Chatham. He is the founder director of environmental consultancy firm and the co-director of Global Policy, Diplomacy, and Sustainability. In acronym, it's called GPODS Fellowship. He's also the assistant dean at the Jindal School of Environment and Sustainability. He additionally holds a master's in environmental law and policy from Stanford Law, where he was selected as one of the top 20 rising environmental leaders. Thank you again to the panelists for joining us today. Let us start with a brief opening comment from each one of you. How would you advise the law school students today in why is it a good time to go to law school and join the law? I would request Mr. Akshay Jain to start off with the conversation.
Sorry, I was saying thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. Rookie mistake not unmuting myself. But I think that if you find yourself in law school, it means that you obviously have an interest in the law in the first place. So that's the first hurdle out of the way. But I think it's an interesting time to look at law as a career, because the kinds of careers you can have today with the toolkit that a law degree offers you is far wider than it would have been many years ago. At least certainly when I was starting out, if you were starting out in India around the time that I did, the only option that you had was to join a senior advocate and become a litigating lawyer. Even law firms didn't really exist in those days. So there was no real transactional law practice. Now in the last 25, 27 years, not only has transactional practice sort of exploded, but there are lots of other kinds of career opportunities, very interesting ones that are available to people who've studied law, not always necessarily in the legal profession. So I think if you're in a law school which encourages analytical thinking, then you have the ability to pick up a set of skills that will prepare you for a variety of different professions, not just the law. And in the law itself, the number of areas of practice are now so varied, and they're so wide that you can be involved in various different aspects of life that are important for the world today, whether it's technology or the energy transition or various other things, which were not really options for lawyers. You had to become a policy person or a technology person. And now law gives you an opening into all of those careers as well. So that's what I'll start off by saying.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Preetham, what is your take on this? Why should students take up law as a career?
I think it's a great time to take up law as a career because, see, law feeds on social networks of, new relationships that emerge. And in a society which is, fastly, becoming innovative, creating new networks across borders, new, social relationships emerging. So this is the, breeding ground for lawyers. So lawyers thrive when there are new challenges and when there are new social relationships developing. And as Akshay said, that the career opportunities in law have really widened out. It was earlier thought that it was a profession where you must have some family background, only then you could succeed. But today that's not true at all. So you have first generation lawyers doing very well in diverse kinds of professions. And I can tell you that there are friends and students who have done law degrees but went on to become, let's say, police officers, entrepreneurs, policymakers, advising startups, starting their own businesses, and working with the government. So the opportunities that law opens up is just immense. And I think the potential of law as a career has only just been unleashed, and it is only going to grow because of the new social relationships that are developing all over the world. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Preetham. It's quite exciting to know that how law has diversified amongst these, I think, the last 1 decade. I throw this question to Dean Conway as well. How do you think law is changing as a profession? And you could also give us a little global perspective on this.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be on this illustrious panel. I am excited to have this conversation. So it's important to recognize, just as my co-panelist has said, that lawyers are the gatekeepers of the organized civilized societies that we live in. And so in that regard, it's really crucial to think about how we as lawyers are transforming legal practice. And we do that through a discussion, a discourse, and a relationship with the practicing bar and with the scholars and teachers in our law schools. So it's critical in that role as gatekeepers that we continue to have these discussions across disciplines, but also to recognize that society is transforming at a really fast rate. And that transformation requires an attention to detail as to what we want from our profession and what we want in terms of a progressive society. And so in that vein, law schools and the legal profession are in this partnership to eke out what the next innovation is, but at all times, and this is critical, and I hope that my comments focus in on this, at all times, equity is the platform, inclusiveness is the platform, and getting the distinctive voices into the conversation of where the profession is going is crucial, because that's how we are going to make our best decisions about the next progressive level of that organized civilized society.
Thank you, Dean Conway, for those comments. This actually takes me to Ishaan, because I feel, Ishaan, you wear multiple hats. You know, you are an environmental and an energy lawyer, an entrepreneur, and a policy analyst yourself. Could you sort of share your journey as to how the degree of law has empowered you to carve this unique path for yourself?
Yes, of course. First of all, thank you, Afreen. I know that a lot of effort has gone into getting this together, and it's an absolute pleasure to be sharing the discussion with Dean Conway, Mr. Jaitley, Dr. Bhura. So thank you for organizing this. It's actually, if I want to talk about my journey, I do not know how helpful it'll be, because I don't think it can be replicated, because a lot of things happen by chance. But I think let me share about my journey, picking up from where Akshay and Preetham and Daniel were kind of left off. I think we are, over the past decade, this generation is seeing something incredible happen to the profession. And I often draw this in my class or in my lectures. I draw this this analogy that in the 1950s, 60s, you had a basic medicine degree. You had an MBBS, as we call it in India. And since the 60s, there have been neurologists and nephrologists earlier as well, but there was the sudden incredible impetus to specializations in medicine. And we saw that happening in so many other professions over the past few decades. In law, you had specializations, but it wasn't as common to have a specialization. But over the past decade, now we are seeing specializations in human rights and IP and cyber and environment and energy. And I cannot even list all the specializations that are happening. So there's an evolution that is happening of our profession as well, where finally specialization is being treated with a certain amount of respect. When I started out in this industry as a young lawyer, I was told by the judge I was associated with in the Supreme Court as a law clerk that specializations are for after you're 45. Till then, you should study everything that the law offers you, and it seemed absolutely brilliant advice. But it so happens that to talk about my journey, I after a couple of years of working in the Supreme Court and the newly established NGT, then the National Green Tribunal, I ended up doing my master's, and then I went off to Geneva to work with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, only to be sent to United Nations headquarters in New York, a city I do not particularly like. So it was always destined for me to come back to India. I came back to India, set up NVIPOL and the GPOTS Fellowship, took up assistant deanship at General School of Environment Sustainability, and the rest, they say, is history. But one thing that I have noticed for all of those who want to become lawyers at some point, or all of those who are studying law and want to become better lawyers, I will say this, because your primary question was, how does it play out in real life? I think a law school, and I don't want to single out law schools, because I think a lot of the impetus comes from the students and the company they keep and those sort of things, the drive that they have. A law school teaches you how to draft a memo. It teaches you how to analyze subjects. It teaches you how to apply your analysis in real life. It teaches you a couple of very important qualities: how to be a good speaker, but also how to be a very good listener. Because for those of us who've ever dealt with clients, we know how important being a good listener is. It teaches you to network, which is a primary skill today. And it teaches you how to work smart. For those of us who've handled litigation dockets know that it's not always about working hard, but working smart. And each of these skills that I've just listed that every lawyer should imbibe or ends up imbibing, even if one is not very keen on going through the rigors of law school as one should, you'll see that these skills can be replicated across all professions. So to Akshay's point at the beginning, this gives you a template that could be followed in other professions. And now we see, I get calls from GPOTS fellows every 3 months saying that I finished my law and now I'm planning on an MPP. And earlier I used to feel bad that, you have the option of going for an LLM. Why would you do an MPP? But it's because now I've realized that good lawyers are able to adapt well, and good lawyers are able to apply those skill sets in other professions as well. So it's a brilliant time to be a lawyer. And it's especially useful if you're an environmental lawyer, because the world quite literally needs you. So yeah, that's been my journey, and that's my direction for all of those who are interested in law.
Thank you, Ishaan. I think this is a very comprehensive view as to what a law degree can actually do in terms of enhancing your career and creating certain new paths, which sort of takes me to Mr. Jaitley here, because, sir, you've been a transactional lawyer for almost 25 years, and you've been practicing in the UK, Japan, and India. So, the students today listening to you would want to know what attracted you to law and the legal profession, and what could be the major hurdles or challenges you faced during your practice, certain advice you would want to give to the law aspirants listening to you today.
Well, my mother would say I joined the profession because I'm argumentative. But I never ended up doing litigation, so I didn't get to fulfill that side of things. But for me, it was, I took a slightly circuitous route to the law. I only started practicing what in India is considered the late age of 27. And I did I went to Delhi University and I studied history. Then I went and did a master's in international affairs in the city that Ishaan doesn't like. Then I worked for a couple of years in energy policy, and that was really the alternative career. The choice for me at that point was, do I do law or do I go into sort of academics and policy work? And while I enjoyed that very much then, and I'm back to doing it now, it was something that I didn't feel was immediate enough in terms of outcomes. The best at a 20-something-year-old researcher could hope to do was to get a box and a table in a large report, and which maybe some people would read, and some people wouldn't. Important that is, but it wasn't for me at that time. So I sort of applied to law school and went and studied law, and found that how I came to do transactional law was a complete coincidence, but I found that it fitted really quite well with my personality, and the combination of the intellectual side of law and the practical side of the profession is something that I find really seductive. It's really attractive to sort of be able to use your brain every day in new ways, but also have a practical outcome with that. And that's what remains something that I think people should look forward to doing in this profession. Yeah, so as I said, I became a transactional lawyer by chance. I happened to make a call to the firm that I started working with, Ashurst in London, and they asking who if they had an office in India at the time, and just called the switchboard and was put through to someone and who said, "Oh, that's an interesting story that you have, what you've studied in the past." It was very similar to his story. Asked me to come for an interview, and there it was. I got the job. I was all packed up in England and ready to come back and join a senior advocate, and that never happened. So as Ishaan was saying that, no one's career is a template for anyone else's. But I think the lesson I would take away from, his experience and mine, and I'm sure many, many others, is that keep your mind open, look out for those opportunities. Sometimes don't worry about about starting your career as early as possible. Try and take the opportunities that come your way if they sound interesting, if the people are the sort of people you think you'll get along with. And then see where that takes you. And you can always sort of pivot at some point if you need to, if you find that isn't for you. So yes, so I worked with Ashurst for 6 years in London and in Tokyo, and then a bunch of us decided that we didn't really want to come back or rather work with any of the firms that existed. So why not set one up of our own, which was I think the only reason we did it was because we didn't know how to assess risk. We had no idea what we were up to. So we just said, okay, we had an idea where we might get a couple of clients from. And he said, let's go and do this. And if things don't work out well, someone will give us a job at the end of it. But that's how we started. And, you know, I have to say that it's been quite a charmed journey for me. I can't say, I can't look back, or maybe it's the effect of not being able to see difficulties that you overcome. But there were of course there were problems here and there. But in general, if you sort of, it's a terrible cliche to say this, but if you put your head down and do things honestly and work hard, and you know, if you're halfway intelligent, then you'll be okay. We were very, very lucky that when we set up, because it was the right time and the right place. The early 2000s was when legal practice, the transactional practice was taking off. We found a little niche in the market for a young firm that was responsive, a commercial, that could speak the language that clients wanted to hear. And that's where we took off from. I think the challenges for someone starting off, or a group of people starting off in the form of a firm, to be very, very practical about, is where do you get your clients from? And the thing is that you just have to, you know, meet as many people as you can, and you know, try and sound intelligent, and make, and those connections will over time pay off. And that's really, there was no magic formula to how Trilegal came to be what it is. It was literally trying to create an equitable platform. And you know, in that sense, I sort of echo what Danielle had to say, because I think if you try and do things fairly, good things will happen as a consequence. And the difficulty is that, you know, if you look for outcomes immediately, maybe they won't come, but over time they do. So we tried to create a meritocratic platform, which you know, as many people know, we were the first firm in the country to have an all equity partnership, a lockstep. So, and you know, the founders very quickly into the existence of the firm could have been voted out by the rest of the partners. We didn't keep equity for ourselves, etc. So I think if you do things with a good set of principles, you will. I really like to believe that you'll attract the right people, and you'll get some version of success. It might not be the version of success that the rest of the world thinks is what success should be, but it's your version of success, and it's what works for you, and that's what you should be concerned about. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Jaitley. I think that's such an honest sort of take on, you know, how a student should start preparing for his or her career in law, because quite honestly, most of us are so much indulged in this rat race that we want to get ahead, but we don't take off some time to think as to how we want to plan our career, even if it means, you know, giving a year or two and dedicate ourselves in terms of training ourselves and upskilling. I think that is really important in terms of understanding where our career trajectory takes place. So I think the panel here today, we have a mix in terms of the approach towards law and in the niche area each one of you is practicing. So it takes me to Dean Conway here, because, you know, if you read her recent publications, they focus on building an anti-racist law school and legal profession through leadership. So I would want Dean Conway to sort of elaborate on the importance of diversity and inclusion in law school, and why is it important, and why is everybody talking about it, you know, and how can law schools also promote diversity in that sense?
Exactly. And as one of the questions is coming through, it's all across the legal academy and legal profession, and our affiliated organizations, our bar organizations, our attorney organizations. And this is critical because we all witnessed on May 25th the murder of George Floyd. And sadly and desperately, the United States is not the only place where this has happened. I've had the opportunity to live and teach in Australia and have witnessed the Aboriginal people's struggles. I have lived in the Asia Pacific, and there are indigenous peoples in those countries who are experiencing struggles, and all across Europe. So this idea of anti-racism and this idea of equity, especially in this gatekeeping profession, will always be with us, whether we want to reckon with it or not. And so our objective is to think deeply and seriously about our call to action to improve the lives of everyone in this world. And that doesn't mean that everyone has to have the same level of benefit. Rather, what it means is we must recognize our allegiance to humanism. And in recognizing that allegiance to humanism, what is it that we need to be doing in our democratic institutions to make things more fair? Attorney Jaitley said this beautifully. How do we make things more fair, especially for people who are othered by our systems? How do we bring systemic equity into our institutions to provide opportunities for everyone who would seek to be part of this? And it is a noble profession, to be part of this noble profession. And so what anti-racism means here in the United States is that we take acts and actions to contest racism, that we change our policies, our practices, and our procedures to recognize that we can be more productive with a system built on equity than we would be with a system built on inequity. That means we acknowledge our daily complicity in maintaining legal structures that perpetuate racism. That means looking at every function in our law schools to determine how equity is actually being achieved or not. And in looking at each of those functions, how do we interrupt them with all the innovation that we know that we can achieve because we've done it? How can we interrupt inequity in the leadership function, in the pipeline function of who we admit to law schools and who we ask to be our teachers in law school, or who we ask to be our staff and administrators in law school? How do we interrupt inequity when we are crafting our curriculum, when we are looking at the way we teach and we learn in the law? How do we interrupt inequity when we are looking at individuals who come to the law at a different stage? So academic success for everyone is critical. How do we look at inequity when we're looking at career options? As I listen to these wonderful panelists talk about their paths to law and the legal profession, what benefits did they have that others may not have had? And then how do we equalize that so that we can get the best out of everyone in our society and they can contribute as they want to, as they deserve to our organized, civilized society? That's anti-racism.
Thank you, Dean Conway. And it's wonderful to see law schools like you taking that initiative to ensure equity, at least at the access of legal education, and of course beyond. That also brings me to Dr. Preetham here, because sir, you have had a background of practice as well as academia, and you are a front runner when it comes to writing on constitutional law and theories. What do you think has changed in this past legal profession since you started practicing? And how do you embody the changes and hurdles to overcome these hurdles and changes in your law school as well?
So, that's a very good question, Afreen, and many of these ideas have been touched upon by the excellent co-panelists. I would broaden it a bit and say that how has law changed, let's say, since when I applied, to law school when I was in the, it was in the 90s. And I come from a small hill town in the northeastern part of the country called Shillong. And at that point of time, there were not many career opportunities available. There were only 2 law schools in the country, which was National Law School, Bangalore and Nalsar. I knew somebody at Hyderabad. I went there, I wrote the exam, I got in. But the moment I got in, I saw that the world opened up. And why did it open up? One, that we were just the 3rd batch. We were a small group. So teachers were able to give attention to us. I think that's very important, that, somebody is able to mentor you in sometimes a personal way to show you where the world of law is taking you. But that's when I realized that if you want to be a lawyer at that point of time, you have to give up the traditional ways of thinking about the very subjects you study. So after law school, I was, determined to go into practice. I went to practice in the Supreme Court, and I thought that, I would bring questions of justice to the table and always be on the right side of the law, so to say. But then I realized that you have to think about the law in a way where it's difficult to be certain about what is the right side. And as, Dean Conway said, and, critical legal theory has taught us that sometimes you participate in actions which just entrench, hierarchical structures in society. As a lawyer, I saw that. But at the same time, because everybody was doing many things, I had applied to Oxford, I got through, and there's a racism angle here. I'm going to talk about, the Rhodes Scholarship. I'd gone to the finals. And then I saw that there were so many lawyers competing at the finals of the Rhodes Scholarship interviews. And the Rhodes Trust at that, on that day, I remember several very, including some politicians today were there in the finals. And they said we reduced the number of lawyers to 1 because lawyers have really come up. So there was only 1 Rhodes Scholarship for lawyers. I didn't get it. And so, but I got a Felix Scholarship. I went to Oxford. I was practice focused, and I did several courses related to regulation, technology, but 1 course on legal theory. And that changed my view of the law. So when I came back, I started practicing. I did a number of things on the regulatory side that in India, sometimes we think about law in a very broad brushed way. But it's important to think about in a fine-grained way where different ways of social, I would not say control, but regulation, need to be thought about creatively. And there, I got appointed to a Supreme Court commission, which is called the Central Vigilance Commission on the Public Distribution System. I was the youngest lawyer there, so I learned a lot that how technology really impacted the lives of the poorest in the society, sometimes in a detrimental way, sometimes in a liberating way. And then when later on, I was interested in, teaching. So I went to Kolkata, I, taught in other places around the world, went to University College London for a PhD. And I started working on areas which I never thought I would work on. For example, cognitive science and the law. And I thought that now here is a, world which I had never explored, but my legal education has opened me up to working on cognitive science and the law, and which has an impact on how judges should be appointed and how they should be trained. And when I came back to work in India, I saw that the world had changed even more. So the traditional jobs that were being done by lawyers, some of it is being taken over by technology. Artificial intelligence in case management systems, in drafting contracts, in doing legal research, the basic ones, those skills will not be relevant for lawyers, but more higher order skills will be relevant. And in our law school at BML Munjal University, we are a young law school. We have a School of Engineering and Technology, a School of Management, School of Law. Our students, and we have made it mandatory that you have to take courses across these schools. So our motive is that our lawyers should be scientifically minded, constitutionally rooted, and technologically, let's say technology native, which is the idea that when you go out 5 years in India, the 5-year degree, there are 3-year degrees, but you go into the market, you won't find a barrier to technology. Even if you don't understand it, you are willing to approach it, right? Think about it critically. And we also encourage our students to take up, courses in coding on skills and perspective like critical thinking, business, organization for law students. The reason being that the new employers and even, universities are now looking for people who are well-rounded, can approach things from a multidisciplinary perspective. And everybody talks about it. Doing it is difficult. Law schools in India have tried it a lot with integrated courses. Hasn't happened, but it happens when you really have people from other disciplines sitting and sharing classroom space, building courses together. And there, I think it's important to have the natural sciences. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that if we don't deal with the natural sciences, the social sciences alone will not be able to give answers, creative answers to the challenges that humanity faces. So I think, Afreen, it's very important to have law schools now which can unlock the potential of individual students. So personalized mentoring is important. Give them an interdisciplinary outlook, make them technology native, but at the same time, the foundations have to remain there. So a lot of what lawyers will be doing will be similar to what they have been doing for ages, which is bring questions of justice and rights to the table in an evolving society where we might not spot what those questions really are. For example, intersectional discrimination, didn't spot them for a long time, but now suddenly it's on the table and we teach that, I won't say teach that, but we learn that together with our students. So I think those who are going in for legal education must choose places which are authentically interdisciplinary, which can give focused attention, and which can make you aware of questions of rights and justice in a rapidly developing, both socially, technologically, and environmentally developing world. I think that's really important. And I have learned the hard way, I guess, going through many countries and, changing disciplines, but this is the future as it looks to us. And I think the prospects are very bright and people should take up this challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Preetham. I think that gives us such a great perspective when it comes to taking up law as a profession, because it doesn't work in silos, right? Like you mentioned, it is an interdisciplinary approach. Any sort of dispute you pick up has various aspects attached to it, and a student of law should be dealing and should be at least acquainted to some of these concepts and theories. This is somewhat sort of takes me to Ishaan here, because Ishaan, I think your sort of work revolves around the intersection of law, policy, and sustainability. And we see that nowadays we are talking about climate change and certain diverse sort of disruptions happening in the environment. What do you think is the reason behind that intersection, number one, and what does the future look like, especially for the legal profession here?
First of all, I'm absolutely in agreement with Dr. Bhura. I think he has sort of summed it up for all of us, I assume, because we are dealing with a profession that feeds into other professions as well. And as a legal professional, you need to have some knowledge into other aspects of life to be a successful legal professional or a successful professional generally. And that, Afreen, goes directly to your question of intersectionality. So I'll give you an example of a couple of things and then come to how are we changing, or how the environmental law is changing. But when Envipol, my organization, was at the World Economic Forum a couple of years back, we did a group study, sort of a dedicated, targeted study on what are the skills that these CEOs and government officials find most important in a lawyer, in a policy professional, across professions, basically. And some things that came up, some things that I've already talked about, but systems thinking approaches, critical thinking approaches, solution based approaches, policy writing, communicating, maybe because there's just so much noise today with our digital presence. We are always listening into something or the other. You need good communicators as lawyers, as policy professionals. And then when the GPOTS fellowship was supposed to be designed, my co-founder and I, we sat together and we wanted to do something on policy, but it wasn't sort of rounding up. And we thought that what is explicitly missing? And what was missing was a prism through which you now see life, you see professions, you see practice, whether that's transactional, that's litigation, that's any other form of legal practice as well, academia for that matter. Which is, if I take the example of Egypt, and if I want to talk about the kind of IR issues that are happening in Egypt, one of the major issues is the Renaissance Dam that's being built by Ethiopia on the Blue Nile River that will affect the water intake of Egypt going forward. You talk about India and you have similar water issues. US is known famously for the rights-based approaches and so on and so forth in water. If you take just one element of a dispute, you'll see that these disputes are now having issues beyond the national borders. For those of us in India, we're very well aware of our domestic disputes with interstate rivers and so on and so forth. But so now we need to look at sustainability. To understand sustainability, you need to have a view of diplomacy, international relations that feeds into sustainability. But all of those issues are worth very little if you do not know how to address them, which is where public administration, public policy, law, these things come into being. So the idea is to give an umbrella of the non-siloed approach that law requires and environment requires. I often, again, in my public lectures, I talk about two numbers, which everyone from the generation that's going into law school should know of. And these are two numbers that need to be approached completely differently. Let me take the example of July 29th as a number, 29. Now, for those of us who do not know in the audience, July 29th was the Earth Overshoot Day, the day on which Earth exhausted the resources that it should have used for 365 days of 2021. So we utilized our biocapacity as a planet on the 29th of July. There's a direct understanding of, all right, there's environmental exploitation, and hence you run out of your biocapacity on July 29th. The second number is, and this is the indirect reason as to why environmental law is going to be one of the major driving forces going forward. 49 square feet. That's the second number. Now, the island part of, for those of you who do not know, the island part of Mumbai, as it is now known, has an average, the 49 square feet is the average space available per person within the island, the central south part of Bombay. And why is that? And to give you an example, I'm sure Dean Conway would be able to weigh in on this. The federal regulation for the size of a prison cell in the US is 50 square feet. So the average space available per person in central South Bombay is lesser than that available per prison cell, according to the federal government in the US. Anyway, why is that? That is because, and this is where environmental law touches every aspect of our lives. Mumbai as a city decided to keep its FSI, floor space index, to 1.33, which means you can have 1.33 times the built-up area of the area that you have. Now, because it kept it to 1.33, what was the reason? Reason was that every piece of land has a carrying capacity. And if you said that you could have 15 or 23, as Singapore does, then you would not be able to sustain life on that. So they kept it low. But what happens when you keep your building laws low? Now, that this is a completely non-environmental urban planning decision. But 1.33 leads to slums because people now cannot afford the limited space that is available. It leads to urbanization, suburbanization. So now you have Thane and Mathiran and Pahalgarh, if I'm saying it right. So many of these other suburbs coming up. And for those suburbs, you then need transportation. So you need to have last mile connectivity, and you have RA, the cases, those kind of cases. But what that does eventually is, while you were trying to save the carrying capacity of your land, you end up having multiple times the environmental pollution due to suburbanization, slums coming up, transportation that is required from suburbs to urban area, so on and so forth. So my point is, these two numbers, July 29th, which has a direct consequence of our actions, and 49 square feet, which has an absolutely ripple effect, indirect consequence of our action that leads into environmental decimation, are the reason why environmental law is going to be what it will be. And it goes without saying that it's the buzzword, and it sort of saddens me sometimes how we throw around net zero without understanding what is net, what is zero, or when we throw around things like climate action without understanding, is it mitigation, adaptation, what is it? So, but the good thing is there's interest, and every generation has its own challenge. And I think our challenge is climate change. And that's why environmental law becomes very important as shapers of our society and future.
Thank you, Ishaan, for that overview there. And your examples sort of relate to us in quite many ways. And this also brings me to Mr. Jaitley here, because he's also somebody who's worked very closely in the law, policy, and energy, the climate side of the lawmaking. I want you to, sir, clarify with the students today, because there's a usual confusion as to what is law and what is policy, right? What is the difference, and probably how does the legal education and practice come into picture when we talk about law and policy?
But just before I start on that, I just want to agree violently with Dr. Bhura on the point of being the necessity to be interdisciplinary. I think as one of the most disappointing things as an employer is when you come across someone who's done really well in their studies, who present well at an interview, but soon you realize they don't know much about the world that they live in or the world that they're working in. And I think I would much rather have a middle-ranking student who has a better awareness of the world rather than a topper who only can quote you the statute and on which page number a case has been cited. We can always look that up. So I just want to make that point first, and it's something that I think that the national law schools need to look quite closely at. They need to have a better grounding in either sociology, economics, politics, or something else in the first 3 years or first couple of years of their curriculum, and not just, I believe people study something like 64 subjects of law. I studied 8 in my bachelor's. Admittedly, it was a unique system in Oxford, but I studied 8 subjects and I still got a law degree and managed to have a career. So the number of subjects you study doesn't matter, it's how you study it. But on the difference between law and policy, I think, let me give you a lawyer's answer first, a boring lawyer's answer, which is law is what you need to go to parliament to change, and policy is what the government can change on its own. So, that's the sort of, but it's a good starting point, because you realize that from a sort of democratic political perspective as well, because it's very important to, as citizens, to be quite vigilant about what is happening on the policy side, and that the policy side isn't usurping what should naturally be the domain of law. So I think that's the constant checking of policy for legality, particularly in India with the constitution, but against other laws as well, is very important. But the flip side of that is that policy gives you a lot more flexibility. If within the scope of, if your policy is within the scope of the law, it allows you to do things, provided you're motivated by the right compulsions. It allows you to do things at a much faster pace and with a lot more attention to detail and granularity than a law would. Laws necessarily have to be, or should ideally be, written broadly so that they can be applied in a wide variety of situations, and you don't have to keep running to the courts to interpret them. But policy can be more targeted. So policy is decisions of government which can be targeted towards the solutions of specific problems that it comes in, which must necessarily be within the scope of the law. I think, for me, policy is it's a sort of when you've practiced for a long period of time, especially in an area which is very policy heavy, like energy and infrastructure, you realize over time that it's not just what you do on each transaction, identifying risks which come from the law and come from policy that is good enough. It's good to make money. The more problems that exist in policy in law, the more risks you have to point out to clients, and the more they'll pay you for it. But after a while, what you'd rather do is have an environment within which those risks are more reasonable, where they're more predictable, and where people can maneuver around them better. And you don't have to come up with structures which are very complicated in order to avoid what was the intention of the policy in the first place, but which the policies, the risks that the policy is creating. So what I've started focusing on in this part of my career is on looking at those changes in law and policy that makes the doing of business, and particularly doing of business in the broad areas of the economy that are implicated by the energy transition, that make those doing business easier. So to give you an example, today in India, if I have a rooftop and you're my neighbor, I can't put a solar panel and sell you electricity as my neighbor. It's not allowed. And there's no earthly reason why it shouldn't be, provided it's all done safely, etc. But today it's not allowed. There are a number of such transactions which are net beneficial to the economy and to climate, which are either not permitted or which are very difficult to do other than for very big companies. So one of the things that I'm beginning to work on is an initiative to look at the electricity sector in a very fundamental way, and to see how we can reform it to make it more susceptible to the energy transition. Because sooner or later, whatever we may say about climate equity, we are going to have some obligations to the rest of the world and to our own future generations. So, so my view on this is, yes, we must fight the good fight on equity, but at the same time, we must do whatever we can, to make our own economy as resilient and as receptive to these kinds of investments as possible. And that's where the reason I'm sort of talking about this is because it is the sort of 20 odd years of practice that I've had of looking at risks in individual transactions, seeing things from an investor's perspective, that has brought me to a point where I can telescope out and say, okay, there are these now system level issues that we can look to try and solve because they lead to individual problems or individual hurdles to individual transactions. So that's sort of broadly the link between law and policy and how it's sort of played out in my own career.
Thank you, Mr. Jaitley, for that. We're almost about to, run out of time. But before we close and we move on to the Q&A, I have one last question from Dean Conway here. Conway, you also are a leader in your community, and it is important to see how women continue to grow in the legal profession. So I would want you to give us a quick advice to the young women listening today as to how can they shape their careers in law. I see a lot of women sort of taking this as a career opportunity, but any sort of guidance from a dynamic leader like you would really, pave a great path for them. So just a quick one from you there, and then we can quickly take questions from the Q&A section.
Absolutely, and thank you for that question, and I will be quick. So I think that the best approach to progressing in the legal field or any professional field for women is to understand the power of their collective coalition building. Women must engage in a sisterhood, and men and other folks who are identify as a different or unique gender can be invited to the sisterhood. Coalition building is key, and being value-added contributors to another woman's success is an almost guarantee of success for another woman. And anyone can be a part of that sisterhood. I don't know if you see this book in back of me, but one of my heroes is Frederick Douglass. And Frederick Douglass self-described and was identified by other women as a woman's rights man. So that is the kind of coalition building we need to be involved with, to see the potential of women in the marketplace of ideas, in the marketplace of profession, in the marketplace of education. Women have so much power to offer, and we need to channel that power and that productivity.
Thank you, Dean Conway, for that. I'll now open the floor for the Q&A. We see a lot of questions pouring in, and I'll quickly take the ones which I feel are the most popular here. We have Dipali. She is a BA LLB student. She says that there's a lot of change happening in the coming time, and we all are aware of the Darwinian evolution theory, which describes the survival of the fittest. And everybody here, is wanting to learn about artificial intelligence and machine learning. How does a law student approach from now on? What are the key areas a specific student should look into in terms of the future? I'm sure students are looking at employability also as a criteria when they take up law as a profession. So what would you suggest that a student should do as in terms of the approach? I open this question to anybody on the panel. They can just quickly take that up. Yes, Dr. Preetham, please go ahead.
Just because something we have been thinking about at our School of Law, that some introductory courses on, the different, realms in which artificial intelligence applies, and some specific, a bit higher order courses on coding I think helps, because this is happening in almost every sphere, of our life. So if lawyers get an insight to that, I think that's important. So in terms of artificial intelligence, I think they should do introductory courses and they should do coding courses, because those will help them, understand and open them up to how different kinds of technologies work. So that is one. And I also think that they should take some of the new courses, which, the Nobel laureate, this time the Nobel Prize went for complex systems. So there are many, courses which are designed to think about areas which you're not comfortable working in, which are not your strengths. Try and put yourself in those uncomfortable courses, because that will make you deal with complexity, which I think is a raging need of the hour.
Thank you, Dr. Preetham, for that. I have another question. This is for Mr. Jaitley here. Again, I think a lot of questions regarding career and policy making. Tanmay here wants to know that how does one transcend from law career to a policy career? I know you sort of addressed a few aspects of it, but if you could share certain other details as to how you can enhance your career in policy making, even if you are a law graduate.
Well, I don't know if it's a question of transcendence. It's a question of deciding what it is that you want to do. Personally, I feel that, someone who's studied law is better off doing a few years of law and practice and work before going into policy. And the reason is that, at least from my own personal experience, what I was capable of doing and what I was asked to do as a result in my early years of policy making and what I'm doing now is completely different. And when people look at policy making, they look at the sort of more attractive, sexy side of it. But that takes a long while to get to, when you're on the sharp end of actually changing and moving the needle on the way that policies work and governments function. So it's not to dissuade anyone, but if you've already studied law, then it might be a better idea to think of the area in which you want to do policy making in the future and try and practice for a few years in an allied field that will give you a set of skills that will set you apart and give you the right experience for the future. Because you're going a couple of steps down the ladder. Otherwise, if you're going directly into policy, which, look, if you don't like the law anymore and you want to do that, by all means, that's what you should do. But if you're looking to make a step to, if you're looking to sort of progress and build skills as you go along, then those skills might be better built using the law, which is a specific set of tools which you're already trained in.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Jaitley, for that. Another follow-up question is that, and this is by Shaurya, that should law students do some sort of specialization in a particular law, like environmental law or cyber law, as they may be required to do so in the future? And I would probably want Dean Conway and Ishaan both to sort of answer this, because, like I said, you have this diverse background in terms of intersecting different niche areas in law. So Dean Conway, what do you think? Is specialization the need of the hour, or what does the future look like there?
Well, in this, I too am aligned with Dr. Bhura and his approach to interdisciplinary studies within the legal program. I think that is so much more important to get alacrity and to get fluency with the world that surrounds you. And, we all can probably bear our ages on this call and know that throughout our long legal careers, we've been able to develop expertise based upon a strong foundation of interdisciplinary study and thought. And the things that I thought I would need to know when I was 23, beginning the practice of law, are so irrelevant. And it's the experience of meeting a new case, meeting a new client, meeting a new situation that requires problem solving that has really honed and refined the skill that I have as a lawyer, a law professor, a administrator. And you are going to develop expertise throughout a very long career. And so look to build that foundation on that interdisciplinary platform, because that's what's going to serve you well.
Thank you, Dean Conway, for that. Ishaan, what is your take?
No, I am in absolute agreement. In fact, it also kind of ties into what Akshay was mentioning earlier, and I completely agree with both Akshay and Dean Conway. And I already alluded to this when Preetham was talking about this. I mentioned how there's a changing trend of specializations. That's to use Akshay's word. It's a lot more seductive now for law students to have a specialization in each of these things. But I completely agree that unless you have a general base in an interdisciplinary or a non-specialized field of study of just practicing, transacting, working in different spheres for the first couple of years at least, you would, apart from knowing everything that happens across in all the fields, you'd also not really know where your interests lie. Sometimes we make the mistake of in a 3-year law program, or in India in 5-year law program, students ask us if it's okay to start only restricting yourself to environmental internships after the 3rd year. And this is being asked to a person who till the 5th year believed that arbitration was his calling. And it was only after 3 years of work experience that I realized that environment is something I like better. So it is very important to gain some general understanding of how law works. And again, one of the most attractive things about law is that you sort of become a jack of all trades by the end of some experience that you gain. And you're sort of distancing yourself or knifing that side of jack of all trades away if you're specializing right from the word go. And again, I implore all the students to have diverse internships, to have diverse moot court experiences. I know that now you have 5 moot courts in environmental law and you have Stetson and this and that. Try different moot courts, try different publications, try different internships, see what you really want. And eventually, after 5 years of working, 3 years of working, 10 years of working, you're going to find that sweet spot that interests you the most. And again, this is going back to what Akshay mentioned in his opening remarks. I think that it is never too late. It is absolutely never too late to switch. So you can always specialize once you have found your calling, but don't impose your calling because ML and AI is the right way to go in this day and age.
Thank you, Ishaan.
Quickly add to that, I think it would be very sad if your first job was your best job. So don't. That's not your aim. Shouldn't be to sort of mold yourself in those 5 years of law school where you're still only 22, 23 years old, and then to get the job of your dreams. Your dreams must keep changing. And so that might be the job of your dreams for now, but it won't be in a few years' time. And so allow yourself to mess around a bit and make some mistakes and not try and have this, because you'll also start telling yourself a story. If you're too specialized early on, you'll say, this is what it is for me. And you won't be as open to other influences as those of us who've muddled our way into doing whatever it is that we're doing now.
Thank you, Mr. Jaitley, for that. Just before we close, I would want to take this one last question, and I think Dr. Bhura has already answered it, but I would want that the wider audience should know this, because these questions keep on coming to us, time and again, that does it matter in which law school you study or you do your undergrad from, and does it really matter if it's not a national law school? So the whole myth around national law schools versus private law schools.
So shall I take it, or just to quickly say that, see, in our society, pedigree has mattered, but now people are more rational and practical. So it's about what happens in your law school rather than what name it has or pedigree it has is what matters. Employers, other educations where you might go for higher education are looking at whether your law schools have good faculty, whether they have interesting courses, whether they pay attention to quality, whether they have a rigorous curriculum, whether you have been able to have a holistic education. So increasingly, this bubble is broken. And, with national law schools in India, I would say there are 24 of them, I think 24. So, yeah, it's so as the supply increases, you might think that, the brand value might decrease a bit. But I would say that don't focus on a name from a perspective of an aspiring law student. Look into what they look into the details, right? Who are the faculty members? What kind of courses? What kind of opportunities? Speak to some of the students in those universities, then make a call. I think that's how one should approach it.
I would like to second that emotion. So that is a fabulous answer. I graduated from a historically Black college and university for law school over 30 years ago, before our illustrious Vice President Kamala Harris came onto the scene. And I was able to leverage the phenomenal education that I received at that institution into what I'm doing today. I've had a 27-year career in the US Army by virtue of that educational experience. I've been a dean at 2 law schools by virtue of that experience. And I have practiced as of counsel for 15 years in one of the largest law firms in Hawaii because of that experience. So it is about fit and about what you do with the education that you receive and how you network and connect with the people who are at that law school. And I'm certain that Dr. Bhura's law school is phenomenal. And that's exactly what you should take from it, the phenomenal support and shepherding that you get from committed educators.
Thank you, Dean Conway. I must say that I really want to extend my thank you to the distinguished panelists today for such a great conversation. Quite honestly, I don't want to stop, and I'm sure the participants in the audience also want to know more about this topic. And there's so much happening in the legal industry. These are such exciting times to study law and pursue career in law. I would like to say that we at LSAC Global are driven by this goal to diversify and strengthen legal systems in India. Since its inception, LSAC Global believes that the legal profession should reflect the ever-increasing diversity of our society and indeed the world that we inhabit. Because of this firm belief, we make sure that our resources are available to advocate and promote broad-based diversity in legal education and across legal profession. We are proud to partner with leading universities such as BML Munjal University here to support our mission. Our goal is also to support the evolution of India's unique legal ecosystem. To this, I would also like to highlight that the LSAT India 2022 registrations are open now for January and May. I request the audience not to miss this opportunity and take the early bird discount for registration for this specific test. It is a gateway to legal education here in India. We are also offering certain practice papers in the form of LSAC Law Prep Series. These offers first-time and repeat test takers the means to practice for the LSAT India exam or any other law competitive entrance examination. Thirdly, like one of our panelists was mentioning, that it is important to participate in moot court competitions. We have introduced a student-focused moot court competition for law aspirants. This somehow gives the students a sort of a platform to prepare themselves in the rigorous moot court competitions which happen in the law schools. So for more information, I would like the students to visit our website, discoverlaw.in. The registrations for the moot court competitions close soon. So I request the audience members to go ahead and look forward to the specific competition we are hosting. Once again, I thank the panelists for taking out time from their busy schedules to motivate law aspirants. I also direct the audience member to follow us on our different social media handles. Please feel free to contact us on the email ID present on the screen, and you could also send in a phone call in case you have any queries. I again thank the audience members for their active participation and the LSAC team for successfully conducting this webinar. I would like to see all of you on the next one. Till then, I hope everybody is safe and they stay healthy. Thank you again to the distinguished panelists for their time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Afreen. Thank you, all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.